All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's producer-led webinar. We are excited to be live from the field again. We'll be here with Dana Crystal, Matt Hintz, and Ken Schroeder. They're in central Wisconsin, and they will be sharing their information about N management from irrigation as well as cover crops. So we're excited for that. This webinar series is hosted by the Discovery Farms program in Wisconsin, as well as the Wisconsin Department of Agricultural Trade and Consumer Protection producer-led watershed protection grant program. So we're grateful that you all are joining us either here on this Zoom webinar, or we're also streaming live on Facebook. A few housekeeping reminders. We will take questions for Matt and Ken as we go throughout the webinar today. So if you do have questions, type those in the chat, and I will, Rachel and I will shout those out and get those answered. So I think we're ready to turn it over to Dana and Matt and Ken.
All right, thanks, Erica, and good afternoon, everyone. A chilly fall welcome from here in Plainfield. Before we get to the interview, I just wanted to give a couple program reminders. So the 2021 applications are live now, and those are due Monday, September 21st. So you've got just about a little under 2 weeks to get those in. And just as a reminder, this year will be a little bit different. That we'll be splitting applicant pools into two different categories. One for groups 2 years and younger, and others that have been around for 2 years or more. So there's also a webinar about the new application process that is posted to our website. And then the other comment would just be for any virtual events or for field days that you'd like posted to the producer-led calendar. Feel free to send those my way or Rachel's way, and we'll get those on the calendar and share those out with the rest of the listserv. So with that, I think we'll just go right into the interview with Matt and Ken. Go ahead, you guys.
Okay, good afternoon. As mentioned, I'm Ken Schroeder. I'm the Extension Agricultural Agent here in Portage County. And so I've been here working at this position for going on 15 years now. And so glad to be here out in the middle of the cover crop field that's looking behind us, and a great fall day. So let us welcome Farmer Matt Hintz here. And first of all, I guess we'll ask him to briefly talk a little bit about himself and a little bit about your farming operation here to start things off. So.
Sure. So our farm started in 1997, so we've been at it for 23 years. It's a first generation farm, so we're learning mostly from our own mistakes, I guess. We farm about 1,500 acres of field corn, sweet corn, soybeans, rye, wheat, oats, barley, canning peas, and alfalfa. We raise some Holstein steers, and we also have about 50 head of Herefords out on rotational pasture.
So Matt, I guess you covered most of the questions we had for you. So again, you mentioned that you're farming about 1,500 acres, and I know that stretches all the way from basically Marathon County to the north to about where we're standing in southern Portage County. So and you've had a variety of soil types. So what kind of soil types have you been working with? I mean, this side of the county is a little bit different than what we see on the west side of Portage County.
Sure. Pretty much everything we farm is sandy loam, or like straight sand, I guess. Where we're standing here today is a billet sandy loam. It's probably the best soil that we farm, and you can't really tell from the cover crop here, but it's like 80% rocks. But it holds moisture and does pretty good for us typically.
Yeah, so part of the discussion today is because we're on this sandy soils, they tend to be a little bit more leaky than some of the other soils that we have. So we really want to focus a little bit on your end management. What are you doing for nitrogen management program in general? I guess just start out with how you've approached it to begin with, and maybe talk a little bit about where you've gone and things you've learned over the several years.
Sure. So what we've done with nitrogen management, I guess I'll kind of start with what we do on our dryland acres. Really field corn and small grains, I guess, would be kind of where we're cropping on dryland. We've gone more from a 2-pass and 1-pass system to 3. So field corn, typically what we do is we put some on at the planter, about 30, 40 units. We'll put on about 2/3 of what we think we need with 2, maybe 5. And then depending on the year that we have, maybe put the next third on. The reason we kind of went with that is on this ground, not so much as billet, but on some of the lighter soils that we farm. If you don't do that, you're going to put way more on than what your crop needs, and then you're going to lose it anyway. So 2012 is probably a good and bad example as far as what yield ranges could be, but I think our farm average that year was only about 65 bushel. We're take like a 2016, I think we have about 170 on the same kind of acres, and that's just a dry land. So it really depends what kind of summer you get in order to figure out how much to put on. So then also on the small grains, we used to just go and dump it on all right up front. Like oats, we'd do it pre-planned, or with wheat, we would dump it as soon as we could get out during the spring. After doing some more research and following guys like Phil Needham, that if you tissue sampling and count some tillers, you can really dial in that nitrogen a whole lot better. And I turned from an average wheat grower into a guy that's doing about 2.5 times the county average by doing that. I mean, it just bites out different. We're being way more efficient with the nitrogen that we're using instead of losing it all. And the straw lodging and all that kind of stuff went away too. So it really made a big difference.
Yeah, so let's just take a little step back and we'll get back to the nitrogen discussion. But I don't recall if you mentioned that you've been no-tilling now for how long, I guess. Let's talk a little bit about the
Sure.
no-tilling. You talked about the passes that you do with nitrogen application, but I know you've been doing no-tilling for a couple of years. And
yeah, actually, first no-till crop, I believe, was 1999. So I've been at that for a while too. We started with soybeans, I guess, and now we've kind of started to no-till just about everything. I'm not afraid to no-till alfalfa or something like that. Where we're standing here, it was a field of canning peas, which almost none of them get no-tilled. But the amount of rocks that we're dealing with here, and how they plant basically is it's a field cultivator with an air drill on it basically, so it's going to flip up all the rocks if we did just let them plant it versus a no-till drill with just coulters. We almost eliminated our rock problem, and it really helped as far as holding the machines and everything when they came in to harvest them. And we had a fantastic crop out here. Probably one of the most profitable crops I've ever grown out of anything I've grown. It's just really turned out excellent.
So you've kind of evolved in your conservation practices that you've been using over the years. So you've been no-tilling for a good number of years now, and then all of a sudden you started adding some cover crops. And you hinted at looking at nitrogen credits and so forth. So tell us a little bit about how you went from your conventional till to no-till to now adding in cover crops and some of the benefits of those cover crops that you're seeing.
Sure. I guess I'll probably back up a little bit to pivot off the no-till thing. I started with no-till mainly to save time, and being a first generation guy, I don't have like tons of equity that I can go and get all kinds of new equipment with. So if I could do all the jobs with the corn planter or something like that instead of owning a disc and a chisel plow and a field cultivator and big tillage tractor and all that stuff, it really came as a really good advantage to me. I also, for the most part, worked off the farm too as well. So time was always a factor too. So we could get that all done at the same amount of time, or get all these acres covered without having to worry about all these extra passes. greenhouses, it was a big deal. Where the cover started to come in was probably about 2010. That was after some wheat-grown wheat that we took off, and we put in annual rye and radish. And then after reading these soil health books here recently, we really cranked it up as far as the diversity that we're at and stuff like that. I mean, I can get on green covers calculator, just go nuts, and then I see what it costs, and I start backing it back down. But I don't know, I get a kick out of doing stuff like this. But then, like nitrogen crediting, you're asking about too. So something that we started doing here last year, that they test the irrigation water to see how much we have for nitrates in there. This farm that we're sitting on here right now, we put 10 inches of irrigation water on a year. There's about 45 units of nitrogen coming out of the water. I'll be honest, when we started this study, I was happy to be part of it, but I thought, well, boy, we're going to find out 5 units or something, big deal. Well, 45 units, that is a big deal. It figures out to about $17 an acre if you want to take the credit for that. And if you use that knowledge of how much that you've got in there, you can kind of fine tune how you feed your crops too and end up with a better result.
So do you in any given year, you put on about 10 inches of water? I guess that's probably one of the challenges, and maybe it's a little early on to get into that. But, you know, on a wet year, you're not putting out much water. So have you given any thought about how to manage your nitrogen with the irrigation side of things added to it?
Sure. Well, if 10 inches is your average or whatever you want to call it, I guess you would just fine tune it around that. You know, on a dry year when you're running harder, it's almost better if you're an irrigated guy because you can control everything then. Where if you get 3 inches of rain, well, whatever you had out here for nitrogen is probably gone, and you're not using what was in your water either. In fact, you're probably making it worse because you lost whatever you did put on commercially. So you know, there's all those factors that play into it. Like a friend of mine says, Mother Nature bats last, and it's often than not the case.
Right. I guess that would definitely be a challenge when you don't know what the year is going to bring, and you're putting out your nitrogen plants. So you got to be kind of flexible along those lines, right?
Yeah, and I guess I should mention too that we do a tissue sample along the growing season to see where we're at too. Because I mean, you can look at a crop and think you know, but you really don't until you pull some samples. In fact, on this field here, for example, typically guys put about 60 units of nitrogen on their pea crops in this area, and because of the tissue samples I cut out the last 30 pound application, and honestly I probably could even cut out more than that if I would have had them results back faster because I put on a little bit pre-planned.
So taking credit for that nitrogen that you're applying, then do you see some cost savings on there?
Yep.
Silly question, but I would guess.
Absolutely. Yep. And you're kind of using your crop like a filter too, as far as that goes. You know, you're cleaning the water as it seeps back down.
Right. So we're still hanging on that irrigation question. Any suggestions or recommendations for other folks that are irrigating? You know.
Yeah. You know, I would start out with definitely test your water to see what it is. This farm here, it's I believe 20 milligrams per liter is what the nitrate rate is in the water. That's higher than drinking water standards, so you don't want to be drinking it. But that's unfortunately pretty common here in the Central Sands. So if you can use that to your advantage, you might as well. It's free money. You're standing right on top of it.
Right. So, okay, let's go back again. So we've talked about the fertilizer that you applied and the one that you didn't apply directly but are applying indirectly through that irrigation water. Now, what about the cover crop, and are you seeing any nitrogen benefits from the cover crops that you're growing? A little bit more on how you what cover crops you're planting and some benefits that you're seeing.
So like in this case, when I was planting this, for example, I kind of had to brainstorm like, well, what if I could grow an irrigated sweet corn crop or a field corn crop with maybe only 50 units of applied nitrogen? because if I could grow maybe 100 units off of what we're standing on here out here right now, which is probably on the high side, but again, with tissue samples, you can, dial that in to see where you're at for sure or not. And if 45 units are coming from the irrigation water and you're going to put some on with the planter, you might be a lot closer to that than you think without doing a whole lot of extra applications. So we'll see. I left a strip without anything growing on it to test against. We'll probably use that Yield 360 soil scan thing to keep a close eye on it so we can get fast turnaround and stuff on it. But in this case with peas, I think they're off, I don't know, 20th of July. We had a lot of growing season where we could grow some of that. So that was kind of the idea behind it, that we might as well use this growing season to our advantage.
And Matt, you were telling us a little bit about, your pea harvest this year and some of the things the guy out here was noticing. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so these peas I grew with Seneca, and something that we noticed I grew this field, and then a friend of mine that no-tilled it for me, he did another field. We both planted about the same time. Both of us had very little root rot, which I kind of made the joke before we were all live here that, peas pretty much die from everything. That's their job, is they die as soon as you dump the bag of seed out. So root rot basically happens when the ground gets saturated and it can't drain away very well. So my theory on why we didn't have much root rot out here and we had a lot of viable plants that were producing was since we no-tilled it, we had better root zone drainage, so the water got away from there, but yet it was still available to the plant too. It was just a little bit farther down. So I think that helped with the health of the plant. But the other thing that it also seemed to do, since we were crediting the nitrogen and taking tissue samples, is because we weren't overdoing the nitrogen, it wasn't lodging the plants, which made them a lot easier for them to harvest. And the field rep from Seneca mentioned that too, that, after doing all these weird things compared to what a lot of the other people are doing, that, maybe there's something to all this. So.
Yeah, so that brings up a fair question. We're basically in the heart of vegetable country here in Wisconsin, right here where we're standing. On these lighter soils, we grow a lot of potatoes and sweet corn and snap beans and peas, carrots, beets. It's just incredible. Everywhere you look, there's sweet corn and potatoes growing. So it seems to me that over the years, the canning companies have been fairly kind of concerned about basically clean field farming and that sort of thing. And so tell us a little bit about what you're finding working with the canning companies. Are they amenable to working with you on doing no-till and adding cover crops? What kind of things have you run across, in having this conversation with the canning companies?
I think it depends company to company and probably field rep to field rep, and possibly crop that you're growing too. I don't get real exotic. Obviously, here at the crops, peas and sweet corn are probably on the easier side of the scale versus maybe red beets or carrots or something like that. But definitely, I think there is something to it. And I guess if you are a grower, I would tell you to try to push the envelope with your field rep, because both of you will learn, and hopefully at the end of the day, it's better for both of you. Because one thing I guess I should mention too is when they harvested this field, it wasn't exactly dry. We did have to touch up a few spots with ruts, but for the most part, it held the machines a whole lot better too. If you turn the top 6 inches of your field into pudding with a big rain, and that seems to be like recipe for the sweet corn pickers to come or something. But, it's just a total mess, and then you got a real disaster to deal with for several years after that.
Yeah. So, have you heard any complaints from them as far as additional trash in the product? It's some things, and again, getting back to that clean farming versus using a cover crop prior and the tilling and so forth. One of the big things we would oftentimes hear is, well, it's got to be weed free, it's got to be clean, because when we come and pick, we're going to be sucking up trash. So have you seen any problem with that? Or
haven't myself, but I guess I will say that we talked to Al Brooks, Marcus and I believe it's Marcus and in that area last winter before we did this, just to kind of get some insight, because I know he's pretty progressive as far as doing this kind of thing. And they were kind of bucking him a little bit, and he said, well, just crank up your fans. That's what you got them on there for. And, his theory was the dead residue from last year's crop is lighter than the green crop that you're trying to pull off of it. And, he's probably one of their better growers, and he's kind of in the driver's seat where he tells them how many acres he's going to grow. So I got to imagine he's got some credibility behind him if he's doing that kind of thing.
So
yeah.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, since we're out here in this beautiful cover crop field, did you both want to kind of go through some of the different species and maybe some of the thought behind including some of the different things in this particular mix?
Yeah. Should I show the rock situation so people understand why we no-till?
I think you should, yeah.
Okay, I'll just pick any random spot. We'll probably hear it random street. See, I hit a rock already.
Hopefully you all can hear that, and I can attest to it. I definitely was trying to dig around in here, and it wasn't easy. So.
Yeah, there's rocks down there too.
Lots of little stones.
But yeah, I mean, here's a turnip that's part of the mix. This is a 9-way mix that we've got in here, and of course I didn't write everything down before we took off here this morning. But we've got turnips, radish, winter barley, Sudan grass, 3 kinds of clover, sunflowers, and winter peas in here. And I'm sure there's something I'm forgetting too, but that's what we got. We ended up pulling a few samples here, I guess, beforehand, because we were afraid we'd have the whole rock situation to deal with on camera. But I mean, we got some pretty nice roots here coming off this winter barley already, especially for only being on the ground as long as it was. So pretty happy with that.
Yeah, what day did you say it was planted roughly?
July 28th.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and turnips, varies in size, we're seeing, but again, you got all this above ground growth, great for wind erosion control. And then you got the tuber on there and some finer roots to go down. But again, so you got this combination of grasses, grass roots, and other larger, tuberous roots. Look at the radish here, and this only tells half the story. We look at the tuber there, or vegetative root, I should say. That's really not a tuber, but there's so much more to it than that. The fine roots, we just pulled this one out, but they're a lot longer and reaching farther down, creating some good root channels along the way. So combination here seems to be working good for you.
I guess that's something I probably ought to mention too, while we're kind of talking about it, the different species that you put in with vegetable crops. For the most part, vegetable crops are not as tolerant as far as diseases and things like that. So I would tell you to probably do a little bit of research on what you're planting. You don't want to create a host for some sort of disease for the next year or something like that. Plan is sweet corn if we get a contract, and if not, it'll be field corn. But I know Ken and I were talking a little bit before we started that I didn't put annual ryegrass in here, because if it's a June planting on sweet corn, that's going to be totally out of control, and we're never going to be able to kill it properly. And at least on the canning side, there is no Roundup Ready sweet corn, so that's not an option either.
Okay. So two other questions for you, Matt. One, you mentioned the green cover seed cover crop calculator. Do you use any other tools to kind of come up with your mixes? And then the other question would be, how do you plan to manage this next spring before you plant?
Sure. Well, I'll do the first one easy because it's simple, I guess. We'll probably use like Roundup and Sharpen on this to kill just before we plant, or right after is probably the plan. Green covers, their smart mix calculator, it's probably one of the best things that I found. It really helps you dial in, and it gives you all the carbon and nitrogen ratios that are important with some of this stuff as well. Plus you can put all your goals and things like that in. Other than that, I mean, I do sell cover crops, but I'm not even going to go there. But that just happened here a few weeks ago, so it's not that big a deal. But after you've done this for a while too, you kind of get an idea what everything kind of does to, you know, what you want in there. I don't know. Biggest thing I think is diversity, and you know, seeds per pound too. I think is another thing to help with cost.
So you mentioned you grow some small grains and you grow some vegetable crops. What made you decide to add these, and what are the benefits to having that in your crop rotation? You know, the small grains and vegetable crops.
Sure. Since a lot of what we call, I guess, could be called marginal soil compared to most areas of the state or some of the areas of the state, I almost think that the small grains are my cash crop, and then corn and soybeans turns into just part of the rotation, especially on a really tough acre. Plus, I guess I like it because it spreads out your workload and all that kind of stuff after the last few harvests from hell where we're getting stuck and snowed out and combining beans in December. When it's 95 and humid, it doesn't seem so bad. So that helps. But the other thing is too, is that by putting a heavy legume cover crop mix in after the small grains, it really helps drive your cost of production of corn down the next year, as well as it helps you with your infiltration. So hopefully it's more drought tolerant and all that kind of jazz too. And even like if it's corn stubble going in the soybeans, I mean, I try to get rye on that and stuff like that too. You know, if we got to call on a plane, I'm not afraid to call the Air Force if we need to. You know.
So have you actually been able to make those small grains profitable, or are they just opening up another window for additional cover crops?
Sure, I'd say both, because I think granted the markets have recovered some, especially on soybeans now, but this spring, you know, my decision to put in a lot of rye last year looked like a really good idea, and I guess I'm still going to stand by it that we still did pretty darn good on it. You know, there's still some to sell, but you know, I'm content with where we're at on that.
Did we have any questions come in at all for Matt, Erica?
We do. The first question is from Ben for Matt. And do you credit 100% of the N applied through irrigation based on 10 inches of irrigation water at 20 milligrams per liter? Or do you credit a smaller percentage of that N?
I'll credit the whole dose, I guess. You know, again, it depends how much we're putting on, but yeah, if we're putting on 15 inches and we're going to be closer to 60 pounds. If we're going on 5 inches and we're 23 and a half or whatever, 22 and a half.
And then a question from Matt. What other types of turnips do you plant besides the purple top?
Purple top, and purple top. First year with turnips, so that's what I'm planting this year. I guess there's no rhyme or reason behind it.
Got it. Okay. And then one more question, or a couple questions here from Aaron. What is your water testing frequency, and is there any specific times of the year that you test the water?
Frequency is once a year. And actually, since there's an ongoing study out here, they kept basically I think it's like once a week they come out to check them. And that's Tracy Campbell that's doing that, so I want to give her credit for doing this undergrad work. But so they come out and they test it, and they found that there's not really a whole lot of variation throughout the course of the year, which kind of surprised me. I would have figured there'd be fluctuations and stuff, but there's really not.
And then do you use varying test results in the nutrient management plan, or are you using averages?
Just averages.
Okay, that's all the questions I see. Is there any other questions for Matt right now? Otherwise, Matt, I can share this slide that you had.
Yep. Yeah, it's fitting good right now.
Okay.
And if I remember right, there's several farms that are listed on that slide. I'd be the green one. I think there's one. It's way hotter than where I am as far as nitrates in the groundwater, but I think most of them were kind of the same range.
you can see Matt's farm is labeled here as the green bar in the box plot.
And if you notice that that's the range that the nitrates came in at when they were testing it throughout the summer. I think there's about a five range there or something like that.
All right, so yeah, it looks like the study, they're looking at maybe 6 farms total.
I think they're fields.
Or fields.
Yep.
Are they in central Wisconsin or?
Yeah, yep, they're all pretty close to this area. I guess I know one other participant, but the rest I don't know. And I don't even know what farm that he's using either, or farms.
Who's doing the study? Is that UWSP or Madison? Or?
It's through Madison. I believe it's partially funded with the WPVGA as well. So they are working on some of this stuff. But Tracy Campbell's the person that's working on it.
Yeah. So WPVGA is the Wisconsin Potato and Vegetable Growers Association, and they've been focusing a little bit more attention on the challenges with the groundwater. So it's good to hear that this is kind of a proactive approach to understanding what's going on. You know, as far as how much can we credit for nitrogen and as we grow our crops. So, yeah, it's good to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions?
I don't see any other questions in the chat. I might go ahead and stop the sharing of this slide here, and then we can head into the second set of questions.
Okay, just to emphasize before we head into that, one quick point, the fact that adding our small grains and adding vegetable crops into your rotation allows you to grow this diversity of cover crops that we're seeing out here. If we're just doing corn for grain and corn silage and soybeans, we're really limited to only growing basically the grasses, because by the time those crops are harvested, we can't be adding the turnips and the winter peas and all the things that we're seeing here, the sunflowers and oilseed radishes, because they don't have enough time to grow time of year. So I mean that's a good reason to add small grains or vegetable crops if you're in an area that grows vegetable crops into your cropping rotation. Any other thoughts on that one, Matt?
I would just say with the wheat price, what it's doing, maybe there'd be more people that are looking into adding that to the rotation and stuff.
Yeah.
And I guess just a quick tip on wheat is it's a high management crop if you want it to yield. So yes, I'd definitely take that advice.
Yeah, I do. Obviously, it can be a good crop.
Mm-hmm.
It takes some management. Okay.
Awesome. Yeah, I think we're gonna shift to under the tents now, but
it looks like we're freezing. We are.
Yeah, there we go.
So now I guess we'll maybe talk a little bit about Matt's involvement with the producer-led group and as well as the demo farms.
Share a little bit, Matt, about the group that you're involved with as far as the producer-led project goes.
So a couple of years ago, a group of farmers got together and formed Farmers for Tomorrow. It's called that because we're in the Tomorrow River Valley, which is actually the Packer River in Packer County. So I don't know, it's pretty. That's a volatile question if you ask around. Anyway, we're in that watershed, and I guess we're one of the few groups, or maybe the only group for the time being, that's dealing with the nitrate issue in the groundwater, where most of the groups are dealing with phosphorus. I guess it kind of started. There was a group of concerned citizens. They were getting pretty wound up about having Appleton sludge spread out here, because Appleton's on pretty heavy ground, and they couldn't get out right away in the spring to spread their municipal waste, so they're coming out on the sands, and they were pretty upset about that. And I thought, well, there needs to be a better way to help educate those people as well as other farmers on how to better manage this stuff. So that's kind of what kicked it off, I guess. So I reached out to this guy here, and he's been a good asset to have all the way along.
So again, that's a little bit on how the group came together, and so what are the kind of the goals of the group, I guess? So.
Sure. Well, certainly we want to try to reduce the nitrates in the groundwater, emphasize on more proactive approach as far as application of nitrogen and stuff like that. You know, we are on light soil and there is no perfect system, but you know, I think there's a lot of improvement that we can be made as far as treating the crop. So that's kind of the emphasis that we're going on. Certainly we're going down a soil health path where we're trying to reduce disturbance and erosion and build ribbon in the soil to hold all this stuff. But at the end of the day, we're probably not going to have the same soil type as Platteville, so we're just trying to make it better with what we got.
Yeah, so another question. So thinking about the group and what's been going on, and how would you define success with a producer-led group right now? I mean, we've started in 2017 really talking about this, so relatively speaking, kind of a young group, but how would you define success?
Certainly, I guess people adapting more of these processes that help with doing all these soil principles. You know, every spring it seems like we've got some big dust storm or something like that. We need to try to reduce that, make people aware of some of the implications that happen when we farm like normal people or whatever you want to call it. So that's probably the biggest reason or whatever you want to say.
Yeah. So what conservation practices has the group been focusing on?
Sure. Big ones that we've been focusing on have been the no-till and cover crops, especially like after a manure application. We'd love to see more ride, but after that to try to capture the nitrates. You know, with the amount of corn silage that's already starting to come off this time of year, the soil temperatures are warm. You know, there's a pretty good chance we might lose some of that nitrogen in the manure that's going out this fall, because you know as well as I do, as soon as the silage is off, the pits are going to start getting emptied. And, you know, we got to try to keep that out of groundwater.
So, talk a little bit more about maybe what the group has been learning over the last 2 years.
You know, mainly it's trying to be successful with these practices. A lot of these groups brought in speakers that are nationally known and learn how to properly set up corn planters and things like that to do different things, or residue management. And you know, like Steve Roth came to help us learn a little bit more about different cover crops and what they can do and things like that. So those are some of the practices that we've been trying to do to get better.
Yeah.
Educate.
Yeah, so that's part of one of the goals, if I recall, was we talked about farmers educating themselves and their neighbors about best management practices. We're focusing on nitrates in this case here. Just talk a little bit more about that. You know, so the things that we do during the year to help educate our neighbors on
Sure.
conservation.
I guess the main thing is we try to make it open to anybody. I mean, you don't have to be a farmer to come to our events. So what we'll do, like this time of year, we got COVID and all that stuff, making things more difficult. But we'd have a field day on something like this, and we'll talk about things that we're doing here today on the internet deal that we're doing. Or like in the wintertime, we kind of have our kickoff meeting, if you want to call it that, usually in February, March time frame. That's usually when we're bringing like a big time speaker or something like that to talk about different topics. You know, it seems to be pretty well attended. You know, it seems like anything with a farmer, you have good food, they'll come. So it usually works out all right.
So we did a couple of cover crop field days last summer. Talked a little bit about interseeding cover crops and had a little demo on that. So it's been kind of fun. So have you been hearing feedback from the farmers, and how are you aware that we're making some progress as far as adoption of practices? You know, have you seen or heard from new folks as far as, you know, wanting to join the group, be a part of it, and increase their conservation understanding?
Yeah, I think driving around, it seems like we see a fair amount of people trying to do no-till and kind of spice up the cover crops a little bit more and just doing oats or something after a green bean crop or whatever that they're trying to grow. You know, I'm not going to sit here and admit we're growing by leaps and bounds as far as adoption and things like that, but I think we're definitely seeing an impact. I don't know if that's to our credit or if commodity prices are looking for ways to save money. I know the fuel price probably reset us a little bit, but you know, I think we are making headway. But me being an impatient person, we're never where we really want to be, or I want to be, I guess. But people need to learn at their own pace.
Yeah. So have you run across any particular challenges or barriers to basically growing the conservation practices in the area?
Probably the big mindset of, well, that doesn't work here, or things like that. You know, it's tough to argue with that if somebody doesn't want to get outside their comfort zone. I don't know. I'm always kind of an outside the box thinker and always trying to do the next new thing or whatever. But I realize that not everybody's comfortable doing that. You know, sometimes if you're comfortable where you're at and there's no reason to change, it's hard to get somebody to change.
Yeah. So I think, you know, we also mentioned that you were part of the Upper Fox demonstration farms. Can you talk a little bit about that and what's going on there?
Kind of a lot of the similar things, except it's kind of a group of us that are, I guess, more into this kind of stuff. You know, just trying to do different things. This field here has kind of been my baby for all three of these different things that we're doing, but you know, there's other guys that are interseeding or trying to take off silage in front of corn silage and then back to silage or something like that. You know, or you know, different mixes like the Milpa mix, where you got all kinds of different gourds and pumpkins and fruits and vegetables that you're growing out as a cover crop mix. So I think there's a lot of good things coming out of that group too.
I have one question, Dana.
All right.
Matt, do you have one piece of advice for others wanting to start a farmer-led group?
Sure. It takes a lot more time than you probably think it does out of the gate. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that a lot of the members don't always see, or people that just come to our meetings. So be prepared that, you know, it's not always going to be a super easy cakewalk trying to get everything done. But I do feel it's worth it. I mean, I guess I take our own little home farm, for example, where we live. I can't drink the water because it's too high in nitrates. And I mean, who wants to live like that? You know, and sitting around pointing fingers at everybody, that's never going to get anything accomplished.
Definitely. I'm not seeing any more questions that are coming in. If you have a burning question, go ahead and type it now. Otherwise, a reminder, we will be sending out a survey later this afternoon about the webinar. And Ken, did you have any more questions?
Basically, I was just going to open up the opportunity to ask Matt if there was anything else he'd like to share, or any thoughts he had in kind of wrapping this up. You know.
I guess it's a thought. I don't know what we can do about it, but I got to be honest. I guess I'm envious of some of the other groups and how well the community involvement is. Our group doesn't really have that. I would say our concerned citizens, they'll come to our meetings, but that's kind of it. And then they kind of run with that information and they don't maybe get the whole picture. You know, I see some of the other groups working together really well with like lake homeowners associations and that kind of stuff. And I I gotta be honest, I'm pretty jealous of you guys because I know when it comes to do some of the cost share stuff, it's hard for us only as farmers to come up with the balancing dollars to offset some of this stuff, especially if it's, you know, more expensive, like say flying on a multi-species cover crop mix. That gets pretty expensive. So it eats up our budget pretty quick. But if we had Paul the pontoon boat owner there shoving money into it, that offsets that pretty quick.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, Matt. And anything else you'd want to share, Ken, from a collaborator's point of view about the producer-led group?
Yeah, so you know, I work with the Farmers for Tomorrow here, and work with the farmers in Mill Creek watershed on the west side of the county, and it's been an interesting ride, you know, really. But it's exciting in that to see as over the years, you know, it's a slow process to get farmers involved, but you keep at it and keep on reaching out and doing field days, doing educational programming. You know, they start to come on board. We, I think in the Tomorrow River group here, we added like 6 new cooperators last year. Again, the group is young, relatively speaking, and, but making that progress, and it's always exciting to talk with new farmers. You know, they'll give me a call and say, okay, so what's going on here, and how can I become involved? So it's persistence, I think, is big. Keeping at it and keeping a level head, but moving things forward.
Great. All right. Well, were there any other questions that came in, Erica?
I don't see any other questions, but a sincere thank you to Matt, Ken, and Dana for standing out in the cold and being live with us from the field. We really appreciate it, and I think it was a really great opportunity to learn.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And apologies if there's some shaky camera work. It's just because I can't really feel my hands anymore. So.
But it was a lot better than being inside the building, I would say. You know,
Yeah.
out in the field, it makes it easier to talk about what's really going on. So appreciate that.
We're sick in 5 days. It's not COVID, it's pneumonia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Take care.